Hi there, everyone. We are going to continue on with our Read Aloud Chocolate Fever. Remember, right? Henry loves to eat chocolate. His parents let him eat chocolate every day, all the time, all different things, breakfast, adding it to meals, breakfast, dinner, lunch, snack, whenever he eats as much chocolate as he wants, and it doesn't seem to bother him until this one day, and he ends up with these little brown freckles all of a sudden all over his arm, and he doesn't know where they came from. Okay, and it was in the middle of his math class with Mrs. Kimball Farber. Okay, so chapter 3 is called Mrs. Kimball Farber's Problem. There was silence in the room for about 2 seconds. Then there was a riot. All the girls began to giggle. The boys chuckled and laughed right out loud. Henry turned red, and Mrs. Kimball Farber, who did not appreciate the humor of it all, turned white. She rapped her ruler against the desks and shouted for silence. "Henry Green," she said, "what is the meaning?" "Little brown spots all over," said Henry. "I was looking at my little arm, and I have these little brown spots all over," interrupted Mrs. Kimball Farber. "I heard you quite clearly." "But you see, Mrs. Kimball Farber, I didn't have them all my life. I didn't even have them this morning, but now—" "I know," Mrs. Kimball Farber said. "Now you have them all over. I'd better get a look at them." Taking Henry's arm, she led him to the window. She said, as she peered at his arm. "Looks like freckles to me." "No, ma'am," said Henry. "It just can't be." "Well, why not?" said Mrs. Kimball Farber. "Because I have clear and delicate skin, like my mother." "Oh, is that so?" Mrs. Kimball Farber said. "And who told you that, pray tell?" "My father." "Ah," said Mrs. Kimball Farber. "Exactly. Now, you are sure you didn't observe this phenomenon before this morning?" "If that means that I see them," said Henry. "No, I didn't." "Well, then," she said, "you, Henry Green, stand right where you are. And class," she said, turning to the face of the room, "you will continue to look at your books until I return. In perfect silence," she added as she walked out into the hall. Henry stood as told while the class looked at him. Mrs. Kimball Farber walked a few steps down the hall to Mr. Pangalo's room. She looked through the doorway and waited until Mr. Pangalo's glanced in her direction. Catching his eye, she waved him out into the hall. "Listen, Phil," she began earnestly. "I want you to take a look at this kid." "Oh, for heaven's sakes, Dolores," said Mr. Pangalos. "I'm right in the middle of American Mississippi. Who has little brown spots all over his arm?" "Little brown spots? You got me out here for little brown spots?" "Well, I thought maybe like the measles." "Oh, no," said Mr. Pangalos. "Chickenpox?" Said Mr. Pangalos. "I better take a look." The two of them turned Henry to the light near the window, right in the corner where the potted plants were growing on the window ledge. Mr. Pangalos poked and prodded and even took his eyeglasses out of his pocket and put them on. "Freckles," he said finally. "Just freckles." So here's the two of them looking at Henry's brown dots all over his arm. "Are you sure?" Mr. Pangalow's round nose twitched, and he sniffed the air. "Chocolate?" he said. "Have you brought chocolate milk upstairs already?" "Forget the milk," she cried. "Look, now he has them on his face." "Oh, no," said Henry. "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Kimball Farber. "Oh, my," said Mr. Pangalos. "And they weren't there before." "No, 2 minutes ago the boy's face was as clear as day, and now—" Henry felt as if his heart were about to drop into his shoes. He swallowed hard and stared at the two teachers who were staring at his face. "Little brown spots all over," said Mrs. Kimball Farber, "and I see more of them coming out, even as we speak." A tear, just one, welled up in Henry's right eye and began to trickle down his cheek, running slowly in and out of the little brown spots. I'll read one more chapter. Chapter 4 is called Pop. Dirt breeds germs, Nurse Molly Farthing would often say, and the germs have a nasty way of making healthy people sick. Naturally, the infirmary of PS 123 was always spotless because Nurse Molly Farthing wouldn't have it any other way. And naturally, as Mrs. Kimball Farber and Henry rushed through the door that morning, she made both of them go back and wipe their feet on the mat. "And don't bring any of your cocoa in here," Nurse Farthing added. She sniffed the air loudly. "Cocoa?" said Mrs. Kimball Farber. "Don't think I don't smell it," Nurse Farthing said. "Please, Nurse Farthing," said Mrs. Kimball Farber. "We have an emergency on our hands. This is Henry Green. He's breaking out in a rash of some sort." "So I see," said Nurse Farthing. She sat Henry down in a chair and turned on a bright light, pushing her spectacles down to the tip of her nose. She bent close to Henry and looked at him over them. "It's a rash, all right," she said at last. "Peculiar. Look at the little brown spots all over." "Exactly," Mrs. Kimball Farber said. "But what is it?" "Have you ever had the measles?" Nurse Farthing asked. "Yes," said Henry, "when I was 5. "Chicken pox?" "When I was 3 and a half. "Then I would say you have an unidentified rash, and frankly, I don't like the looks of it." Henry, who up until that time was merely frightened, began to feel terrified. Nurse Farthing laid her cool hand on his arm and steadied him. There, dear," she said. "Nothing to be frightened of. I'm sure it's not serious. How do you feel?" "Not so good," said Henry. "Warm?" "No." "Cold?" "No." "Dizzy?" "No," said Henry. "I just feel strange." "You poor dear," said Nurse Molly Farthing. You really must be frightened." She ran her fingers through his hair and patted the back of Henry's neck. Somehow this made him feel a little better. "Pop!" "What did you say?" asked Nurse Farthing. "Did you say something?" "No, ma'am," said Henry. "Pop!" "What was that noise then?" she asked. "It sounds like something going pop." "I heard it too," said Henry. "So did I," said Mrs. Kimball Farber. Pop, 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 pop. Now they all heard it. The sound of popping filled the infirmary. Little pops and bigger pops and poppity poppity pop pops kept popping. Henry looked at his arm and in an instant knew where the noise was coming from. The little brown spots were growing bigger and bigger. They were popping out all over him. No longer the size of a freckle, they were as big as chocolate bits his mother used for baking cakes and cookies. He could feel them popping out on his arms and face, could feel them growing under his shirt. In less time than it takes to tell it, Henry Green was covered with little brown lumps from the top of his head to the tip of his toes. And here's Nurse Farthing looking at him while they're going pop, pop, pop. So that's where the chapter ends. And Henry's problem seems to be getting a whole lot worse. So we'll have to wait and find out what he's going to do about his freckle problem. Bye, everybody.